Thank you, everyone. My name is Miguel Valdés Faura. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bonitasoft. And yes, I'm going to be that guy here at bpmNEXT talking about applications. And in particular about how to build process-based applications that are sustainable so that can be changed easily. And that's important because, of course, everybody's talking about, your business needs to react to change. But if your applications are not built for that, it's going to be really hard to support that change. So really simple concept, but I'm going to be talking about that. That's not new. That's been the great promise of the market, the BPM market for a while. You can build applications that based on processes that are easy to create, even faster than with custom application development, easy to maintain, easy to update. But the reality is sometimes a little bit different. It's hard still to customize, and I was talking about that yesterday. You need to compromise sometimes when you are building the user interfaces. It's not that easy to continuously update business applications. So I think we can do better as an industry. And this is our take on how we plan to do better. We call that living applications. So it's not only about building more rich and engaging user interfaces. It's also about making all those live changes on all the components that compose an application. First thing, this is built from developers, by developers to developers. So this, at the same time, graphical tooling for developers and also freedom for developers in case they don't want to use the tooling or they do want to use the tooling only partially. That's about going way beyond generic BPM portals that you customize or standard forms. This is about building amazing interfaces. Again, don't compromise when you're building your UI. So this is one of the key things. The second major thing is about, as I mentioned, live changes. We want to be sure that you can make live changes, whatever you are in pre-production, production, or development qualification, in any of the pieces of your process-based application, from the business logic to the user interfaces to the business data model. This is something we're still in our labs, so it's an alpha version, but I wanted to present it here at bpmNEXT. First time that I'm going to show that outside of Bonitasoft, but we're going to be shipping that in the next coming month. So what I'm going to do in the demo is, first of all, show you, the user interface that we're going to build. In this case, it's going to be a really simple, procurement application. So I'm going to explain a little bit, how this application is composed from the process to the UI. I'm going to also show, the graphical business, the graphical editor to build each one of those components of the application. We call it pages. A user interface is composed by different pages. So I'm going to show how we can do it graphically. Also, the extensibility part, really important for developers. What happens if, as a developer, you want to extend our graphical designer and you want to add your custom widgets on the left side, or you even want to export the actual code of this page and continue coding by hand. This flexibility is important. What happens also if we want to add additional flexibility and import another page, another component, another UI that was developed outside of our framework? That's also possible. That's the third extensibility point that developers like. So I'm going to also illustrate that. And then I'm going to focus on the live changes. And the live changes in our architecture is by clearly separating business logic, business data, and user interfaces. By separating that and by defining how those different layers interact with each other, then we're going to be able to apply those changes. Key concept here, the contract. What is the contract between how the process, the business logic, and the user interfaces are going to interact? I'm going to talk about that during the demo. Really important to be sure that you can make those changes if you separate, by separation of concerns. Fake on sync, nothing major here. Everybody knows that. Clear separation between, the data, business data that we're using, and the processes that are going to use this data. All that is going to be stored in two different databases. We're going to be used as reference. Here is an example of how each one of the user interfaces through the contract is going to interact with the business logic, in that case, a human task. I'm going to also demonstrate that in the demo. And here you have the whole picture, any components of the user interface is interacting with the process through a contract, and then through different APIs, with the business data. As this user interface is oriented for web developers, everything is, we're using REST APIs for that. And last but not least, I'm going to finish the demonstration with what happens if when I'm in pre-production or in production, I'm going to change one piece of my user interface live without impacting the contract. I'm going to illustrate that. So enough talking or enough PowerPoint. Let me switch to the demo. OK, yeah. So let me just explain you really quickly the different components of this application. As I was mentioning, This is a procurement application. Nothing fancy, but just to illustrate, so you see the value here. So this procurement application is going to be composed by two processes. So then you see that two different processes are going to interact with the user interface. This is the procurement process, really simple. I need additional chairs for my office, so I'm going to send different quotes to some providers. Some of the suppliers are going to provide a quote. I'm going to pick the best quote, and I'm going to send a PO. Sorry for the definition. It's not really good here. It's way nicer in my screen. And then a second process, really simple, this one, which is going to be register a new supplier. So just to illustrate that one step, I'm going to add a new supplier here. Again, just for the purpose illustrating two different processes working with the same UI. Second important topic, that's the business logic. Second important topic is business data. So here's how we define business data. And in this example, three different objects, a quotation on the top, a request, and a supplier. So all that is defined, and we're going to cover that in a minute with our solution. So you define objects, you define relationships between objects, and then, of course, all that is automatically stored in any SQL database. But we're going to be back to that in a minute. And then, finally, the user interface. So let me show you that. I have here a dedicated URL to an application that is called Procurement Application. I'm going to log in. Let's say that today my name is Walter. So here is this simple application. The structure of this application is a navigation bar, a logo, two different main pages, request and suppliers in the menu. All that is, you can work with that, you can design that pretty easy. And then we have also, four other subpages that we can call it forms, that they're going to be the ones that help us interact with the process. So this application is composed by 6 pages. In those 6 pages, 2 are basically pulling information, the different requests going on, and the suppliers. And then we have 4 other pages that are forms that are interacting with the business logic and being sure that we can interact with the process and moving forward. So in this case, for example, here I have the list of the different requests, procurement requests. Here I have a nice graphic getting data from the database about the different procurement request status. And every time I click here, I can get additional information. So we really make a difference now between a page, which is a user interface that pulls data from different sources. In that case, this data comes from the business data objects. This data comes from the Bonita engine, and the forms that are the user interfaces that helps the user to interact with the process. Two different things, but the same thing is a UI. So let's see how we build that. And let me show you a couple of things. So first of all, the contract. If I go back to the process, this is the first step of the process, the human task. This is where I can send a request to say, okay, suppliers, this is the thing that I need. Those are the different topics that I need. So we have something new now at Bonitasoft, which is the contract. This is the contract. So those are the data that I'm expecting from the user, so from the user interface, to be sure that I can move to the next step of the process. So the engine is going to refuse to consider this step as done if from the user interface I'm not getting those data. And this data is a summary, a description, and a list of suppliers. But by separating that, you clearly define what is the business logic of your application and what is the UI of this particular page. So that's what helps us, for example, to then change the UI without impacting the process. As soon as you respect the contract, you can do changes on your UI. Let me show you how this form is built. And before that, maybe we're going to execute the form. So if I click here on Start a New Request, this is the first form that is associated with the first task. So really simple form, list of suppliers that I can select here. So let's say that I'm going to select 2 suppliers that I want to send the request for a quote. I don't know, 2 new chairs for meeting room. Here at the bottom, I decided to highlight the data that I'm going to send as a contract to the process. So you know that if I click here on send request, I'm going to get here an error. I didn't catch the error, but the point of doing that is that if some information here is missing, the engine is not accepting that this form is submitted, to make the process flow going. So I'm going to say, OK, red color, of course, at Bonitasoft we love it. And then I'm going to be sending the request and creating, of course, a new instance of the process. So let me show you how, that was built. So this is, and again, this is an alpha, so it's going to change a lot from, between now and when we ship that. And yeah, and it's really white here. Anyway, so this is the new page editor. This is how web developers are going to be able to, build those forms and those pages in your UI. So this is the form that we just saw before, the title. Here we have the tab. You remember, it was like the list of suppliers, and here the different needs. If I click in each one of those attributes here on the right, you have the different, attributes. And we start seeing here things like contract.summary. So by default, the editor is aware that a contract is needed. So there is always a contract variable that you can use. It's here. .summary is because we know that this data is part of the contract. So automatically, we help the developer to say, OK, yeah, you need to have at least in your form, an input that is a contract.summary, and you also need to have a form in your form something that is contract.description. So this is how, we make the developers, know about it. And of course, at some point, you say, I'm going to send this information to the engine, to the process. So the information here is like, OK, I'm submitting a task. You have different operations. I'm sending the contract. So I'm sending the whole contract to the process engine. What happened if there is an error? And what happened after successfully implementing that, successfully executing that? What is the next web page or the next interface that I'm going to show? Of course, at any time, you can have a preview of that. And you can have a preview on different devices. So this is the form that we just saw when we were executing, you remember, with no data. This is the one that you're going to get if you are using a mobile device. So all that is based on HTML and AngularJS. Why? Because developers love AngularJS. There is a huge community now. We're getting a huge adoption since we start supporting that framework. So now for us, here is the next step, is to providing the tools that helps developers to develop faster. So that's about, really quickly, the contract and how the user interfaces, especially the forms, interact with the process. Of course, something that I forgot to mention, you can also say that you want to define forms or pages differently if you are in a mobile device or if you are in a, in a laptop. No? So if you are not doing that, automatically we're going to try to render it and guess it for you, but you can also do that way. OK, what else? Let me show, as we are in this page, you remember that in the form that I just showed before, we have a list of suppliers that I was able to select to send them the request. So how this information, how we were getting this information? Really simple. So we have a variable called all suppliers. I'm doing order by name. And basically, this is a REST API call. So that's what's happening underneath. So again, AngularJS developers, web developers, they know how to do AngularJS and how to do REST API calls. That's all they know. So let's make their life easy. So this is how they are interacting with Bonita through our REST API. So for example, to get a list of suppliers. And of course, we try to make it really simple. So if I'm going back to the business data model here, for each one of my objects, I have queries that are generated automatically. This is SQL. I can create my custom queries. But of course, as we don't want developers to directly access my business data model through SQL, everything is exposed also through a REST API. So when you define the business data model, this is about playing with objects, relationship, storing that in your favorite database, generating the queries, and automatically exposing all those queries as REST APIs so developers can use it. Pretty simple, really straightforward. And if you don't want to use, if your data is not stored in our database, you are using your own storing system, or you have your legacy system storing data, as soon as you have REST APIs, you're going to be able to use it from the web editor. So that's the first thing about, OK, we're targeting developers, but we always thought that, developers also likes to have tooling. So we're following the same approach. So this is tooling for developers. What happened, because that happened all the time, what happened if a developer wants to extend, want to change, want to get his hands dirty and do some code? 3 different possibilities. First, what we call here custom widgets. You can add your own custom widget. So you can add your own custom component, which is going to be HTML and AngularJS, to add a different behavior, a different, a new attribute on the palette. And that was super important. So let me show you how that looks like. For example, here, this is a customized button. So for the ones of you that are techie guys, this is AngularJS, so it's a template, a controller, and some parameters. So you can easily extend and add your own custom widgets. We are just reproducing here something that has been working for us pretty well with the connector framework. Bonitasoft is really well known as a platform that is really easy to add new connectors and extend the current set of connectors available. So we're doing the same thing on the widget side of the story for building the UI. So we are getting already some good feedback about the approach, even if people are not yet interacting with this new version. What else here? So that's the first thing. The first extensibility point is you can add new widgets. Okay. Second extensibility point, at any time, you can just say, I'm going to export this page. And I'm going to do some manual coding if I want. I personally don't, but most of the people like to do that. So this is a zip file, pretty straightforward structure, resources, HTML page with AngularJS, properties file for translating that in different languages. If I have a look to the HTML5, so this is, let me open with that. Again, if you are familiar with AngularJS, this is what you get. So you can continue editing that by hand if you want to tune a little bit outside of the editor. That's a second possibility to extend. And for example, here, if we have a look to the resources, pretty straightforward. CSS, you have the different widgets, and you can clearly differentiate the ones that we are shipping by default and the ones that are called custom something. Those are the ones that we added. So for example, adding a new is just JavaScript and some JSON. Pretty straightforward. Really thinking on web developers. So that's the second option. You are still using our web editor. You are adding custom widgets, and you want to do some coding on your side from something that was generated. Third option, you don't want to use our tool, or for one particular page, one particular component of your user interface, you have already your code. You want to use your own code, you can do it as well. Let me quickly demonstrate that. I have a page here that was already built, and it's called the AngularJS dashboard.zip. This is an AngularJS page that we demonstrated, I think it was like 3 months ago in a webinar, in which is like a traditional to-do list, but customize it and a little bit personalized. So I'm going to just, and that was done way before we had the graphical editor. So it's just a page developed with HTML and AngularJS. So let me show you how you can add that to an existing application. You remember, we have here our application, 2 main pages. Let me change that. For doing that, let me log here in Bonita. I'm going to do everything with the same user. It's way easier. So I'm going to go here to the administration. So I have something called custom pages. You can add new custom pages, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm adding a new page to my environment. That should be here. Okay, there are some basic validations. I'm doing that runtime. So as soon as I imported this page, I can go back. Sorry, I can go to the list of my applications deployed. We see here that we have a procurement application. So I'm going to edit this application. That sounds familiar. We have the 2 pages, request and suppliers, and we also have the navigation. So let's change it. Let's add a new page. Let's call it dashboard. let's say that also we want to change the menu that we saw. In the previous menu, you remember only 2 pages, request and suppliers. Let's say that this is also called dashboard. And we are done. So as soon as I click again or I refresh my previous application, I should have a new page that comes here. The navigation has changed. And if I click on dashboard, I have this new completely page. So I'm not saying that you are going to do that all the time in production. But even doing that in pre-production is really useful. So we just add a new page, change the navigation, and maybe the look and feel of the final application on the fly by adding a page that was developed even outside of our environment. So it's just so nothing really complicated or super fancy here, but I think that it's for you to get the idea. No? Last but not least, let's do a change on a live change also on one of the existing forms. Today I'm going to only demonstrate that, how we can change one of those pieces on the fly, a form. But when I'm talking about living applications, when I'm talking about being sure that you can make live changes, that can be, what about if you want to change the business model that you have? What about if you're going to migrate all the instances that are running from version 1 to version 2? All that is part of what we're going to call living applications. No? And this is what it's now possible at Bonitasoft because we have clearly separated business logic, business data, and user interfaces. So when I'm talking about live changes, it's live changes on all those components. What happens if a connector is in failure? Can you change a connector implementation on the fly? Yes, now you can. So here I'm going to demonstrate how we're going to change on the fly a user interface without changing the contract. And for doing that, and then I'm going to do it live, so that's taking the risk here. We have the suppliers page here. I'm going to add a new supplier. So here you see that in this page, there's a to-do, so it's not yet implemented. So let's imagine that it's implemented, but we have an error, and I want to change it on the fly. So I'm going to go back to desktop. This form is actually associated to this task and has a contract. The contract only has, I'm making my life easy, so only one attribute name. The form is called supplier register form. Let's change this thing on the fly. So I'm going back to the editor. I'm going to remove this to do. I'm going to add an input value here, and I'm going to add one of my buttons. Of course, I can play with the size of the screen, whatever. Let's do some makeup here. The default label is going to be new supplier. Here is what I need to say at some point, that the value, is the contract.name, because this is what is expected, as you remember, in the contract. So I'm saying this is going to be the name attribute that is going to be send it there. And then I'm also going to do some makeup here on the button. So I'm going to say this is a register thing. It's going to be center. This is a primary button. The action is going to be a submit task. So when I click this button, I'm pushing this information to the engine. And what is the data that I'm going to send when I click? The contract. In that case, only with one attribute, no? And then, OK, what happens if there is an error? I have a variable here that is called submit error. And then what is the URL redirect page that I'm going to use? So I'm not going to take any risk. It's going to be this one, but I'm just going to copy paste that. So here we have. I can do a preview. OK, that's working. Pretty straightforward. I can do an export on that. And let me show you how we can change this page on the fly. Let's go back to the portal. Let's go to the list of different custom pages. This is the custom page, or this is the form that I want to change. So rather than delete it, I can do edit. Let me choose the file. Here we go. Let me go back to my application. Let me now click on register. Here we go. Now we don't have the to-do anymore. And you can say, I don't know, Mr. Office Inc., I don't know, and I'm registering a new supplier here, no? That is starting a new process. So that's all for the demo, but hope you get the point about the separation of the different elements, our focus on developers, embracing more and more web developers, providing the tooling, also the flexibility, and also the dynamic and life changes, of the whole process. So thank you very much, and of course I'll be happy to answer any question.